All right, let's take a trip. We're going back 2,000 years to uncover what might just be one of history's greatest technological mysteries. I'm talking about an invention so incredibly ahead of its time that it literally forced us to rethink everything we thought we knew about the ancient world. Today, we're diving into the story of the Antikythera Mechanism.
So, where does a story like this even begin? Well, not in some high-tech lab, but deep down under the Aegean Sea. Picture this. It's 1901, and a group of sponge divers are exploring an ancient Roman shipwreck. And they find this, a crusty, corroded, kinda boring-looking lump of bronze. For decades, that's all it was, a weird curiosity. Nobody, and I mean nobody, could have guessed that inside that corroded mess was a machine of just absolute genius.
So, yeah, let's start right there with the discovery. Because how this thing was found and then almost completely forgotten is a story that's almost as incredible as the device itself.
Okay, so once it was pulled from the depths, the mechanism was shipped off to the National Archaeological Museum in Athens. But you have to imagine the scene. It's sitting there next to these incredible, magnificent statues that came from the same shipwreck. And then there's this crusty old thing. Of course it was ignored. Its real secret just sat there, dormant for decades, just waiting for someone to finally take a closer look.
And that someone didn't really show up until the 1950s. A historian named Derek de Sola Price started the first serious investigation. Then, in the 70s, the first X-rays gave him a peek inside. And yep, there were gears in there. But the real game changer, that came way later, in 2005. With super advanced imaging tech, researchers could finally, digitally, peel back the layers of corrosion and see exactly what was hidden inside.
And this right here is where the whole story just explodes. Thanks to that new technology, scientists weren't just looking at a lump of old metal anymore. They were decoding a mind-blowingly sophisticated piece of ancient science.
So what was it? Well, it definitely wasn't just a clock. What we're looking at is the world's first known analog computer. Think about that. No silicon chips, no electricity. Instead, it used physical gears and dials to calculate and model the heavens. It was, quite literally, a clockwork cosmos in a box, built 2,000 years ago.
And the ambition of the people who made this is just staggering. I mean, listen to what this thing could do. It tracked the position of the sun and the moon. It showed you the phases of the moon. It could even predict solar and lunar eclipses. And it didn't stop there. It had complex calendars built in, like the Metonic cycle for aligning lunar and solar years. It even had a dial to track the 4-year cycle of the Olympic Games. It's like a complete astronomical encyclopedia you can hold in your hands.
The whole design was just so smart. On the front, you had the main display, basically a clock showing you the cosmos. But the back was like the data center. It had these really cool spiral dials that tracked longer cycles for calendars and, get this, for predicting those eclipses. People have called it a hand-cranked iPad from the ancient world, and honestly, that's not a bad description.
Let's just zoom in on one piece of its genius for a second. Predicting eclipses. The mechanism had something called the Saros cycle built right into its gears. Now this is a complex, roughly 18-year cycle that ancient astronomers knew about, and it helps you predict when eclipses are going to happen again. But here's the crazy part. This knowledge wasn't just written down on a scroll somewhere. It was physically built into the machine, encoded in the math of the gears themselves.
So, okay, knowing what it did is pretty mind-blowing, but figuring out how it did it, well, that reveals a level of engineering that, until this discovery, everyone thought was simply impossible for the ancient world.
Get this. From just 82 little surviving fragments, researchers have found at least 37 separate bronze gears. The whole thing probably had way more, and every single one of them is a tiny masterpiece of precision engineering. And we're not talking about crude, clunky work here. The teeth on these gears were hand-cut from bronze sheets into perfect little triangles. The whole thing was this incredibly intricate network of gears, all designed to mechanically copy the mathematical ratios of the universe. It's beautiful.
They were using techniques that are just shockingly advanced. For example, the moon doesn't move at a constant speed in the sky, right? To account for that, they built this brilliant system with gears riding on top of other gears. This kind of mechanical thinking was more than 1,000 years ahead of its time. Seriously, we wouldn't see anything like it again in Europe until the massive cathedral clocks of the 14th century.
And the only reason we know any of this is because of our own 21st century tech. We're talking high-resolution CT scans that let scientists create a 3D model of all the gears without ever having to break the fragile pieces apart.
and other imaging tools helped them read thousands of tiny, faint letters inscribed all over it, which, it turns out, was basically the user manual for the device.
Just to give you an idea of how important this thing is, listen to this quote from Professor Michael Edmonds, one of the main researchers on the project. He said that because this device is literally the only one of its kind we've ever found, a testament to a completely lost technology, he considers it to be more valuable to history than the Mona Lisa. Wow.
So, okay, what does all this mean? What does finding this one single object do to our understanding of the past? Well, the implications they're huge.
Basically, the Antikythera Mechanism just shatters the old, simplistic view of ancient technology. The idea that they only had simple tools and primitive mechanics. Now we have proof of complex, miniaturized clockwork. We used to think their scientific knowledge was all just theory, stuff written in books. Now we see it was being put into brilliant, practical use.
And you have to understand, a device this complex doesn't just appear out of nowhere. It wasn't a one-off fluke. It must have been the peak of a long-established tradition of mechanical engineering. But, and this is the craziest part, for reasons we still don't really get, that entire tradition just disappeared. The knowledge was lost, and the world had to wait for more than 1,000 years to even begin to catch up.
So who built it? We'll probably never know for sure, but the science baked into its gears gives us clues. It points to the big intellectual centers of the time. The astronomy has fingerprints of someone like Hipparchus of Rhodes. The pure mechanical genius, well, that makes you think of the legend himself, Archimedes of Syracuse. We don't know the name, but whoever it was, they were without a doubt one of the greatest minds of their time.
And that leaves us with one final, kind of haunting question. Look, this thing survived for 2,000 years at the bottom of the ocean purely by accident, by sheer luck. It really makes you wonder, right? If something this incredible could be so completely lost to history, what other marvels from the ancient world are still out there, just waiting for us to find them?